Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the 8 p.m. Debrief Cookout. You're joined by your usual co-host, the sensational F1 Black, and the MDM, the modern day Morgan Freeman, aka AMG Dents. And what a historic week it's been in just motorsport generally, with Lewis Hamilton making it 5 and 5 podiums, George Russell securing his first career pole with Mercedes, Black's boy Alexander Rossi winning his first race in 3 years in Indycar at the Indianapolis road course. And then my boy, Raffaello Marcello, winning the crown jewel of them all at the GT3 racing, becoming the king of Spa in the Spa 24-hour endurance race.
Perhaps the biggest talking point of the weekend, it wasn't the Mercedes podium. Absolutely not. It wasn't Ocon's outrageous defense of Alonso, although we'll on the start-finish straight, and we'll get to that a bit later, I think. It was Ferrari yet again committing another atrocious strategy blunder. We've got a decent lead, or at least for the race for Hungary, a decent lead. Max Verstappen's come into the pit stop. He looks like he's going to do the undercut on Sainz. Do we bring Sainz in? No, let's not bring Sainz in. I'll tell you what we should do. We should bring a guy with fresher tires in and put hard tires on that don't seem to work.
Absolutely not. The referees put the howler in 4K on the big screen, and VAR came back and returned and announced that was an absolute stinker. And it's week in, week out. And if the listeners remember us saying last week, like we said, this week had to be the one where Ferrari needed to secure that race win, because obviously they had just started the charge, probably back in Silverstone with Sainz. Then they had gone 2 for 2 at the Red Bull Ring, with Leclerc, and even that victory wasn't without its last-minute dramas with the throttle pedal. And then obviously we get to Paul Ricard. They do all the hard work on a Saturday. They lead the race only for Red Bull to undercut them. Don't react to the undercut, puts Charles into panic mode. Then the inevitable scream of hell arrives. So, our analysis and how we came to the conclusion we've come to is that Ferrari needed to have a better weekend. They were going to a track which favored their package more, as it's a low speed circuit with a high downforce emphasis out of slow speed corners. Every single variable that you could wish ever could go in their favor was given to them, with Max qualifying in P10, Lewis having the DRS failure in qualifying, and even Charles being able to actually make the overtake on George Russell work with the medium over the soft delta. But again, Black, they just cannot put 2 and 2 together and make it equal 4 for the life of the Ferrari mechanic. Those tires are hard as hell, and they offer you no grip beyond like a certain temperature level. So it was absolutely ludicrous that they put Charles in that predicament. And obviously, no matter what Charles did, it just made the howler worse, because you then started to get like an influx of rain showers and stuff like that coming forward as well. Then I don't know how it was that Charles was clearly the driver with most pace. But what Ferrari ended up with was with a P4 and P6 retrospectively as well in relation to that, which is nuts. And then another thing I'm going to throw back to you, Black, was just the nonchalance of the howler, because at the end of the race, Binotto was, very, very, eagerly interviewed by a lot of the pundits. And, his body language was one of calm, which I could understand from a sense of you don't want people to see that it's burning you on the inside. But to me, just like in terms of the strategy of Ferrari, it's very abundantly clear they're not the races this season, Black. And, this is maybe a team that hasn't been at the sharp end of the grid in a championship battle for quite a long time, and it's showing and reflecting that in every single performance. We heard that very interesting story of him walking out of an FIA meeting and then having to pay a fine for it. So clearly maybe he's not on the same terms as the FIA and some of the governing bodies. And as well as that, I think maybe he stayed. Maybe he wanted to stay at Aston Martin to see if this year's formula was going to be anything similar to the blow in the fuser days. But now that we've seen, it's not quite that. And obviously, it's made the racing closer when the cars are closer to each other. But in terms of the teams, you know, there's still a huge gap between the fastest car and the slowest car. So I think in that regard, maybe he's checked out. And Seb's always been a family man too. So you can obviously, you know, respect a man when it comes to his family and wanting to just, you know, see his kids grow and to just kind of spend more quality time out of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. I'm really intrigued to see, you know, what Seb does next, because you can imagine him literally disappearing off the face of the planet. That's like kind of a very plausible option. Or he could end up doing something to do with sustainability. We've seen Lewis with his Extreme X championship, you know, his X44 team. What will Seb do? I don't know. Let's you know, I want to be respectful of Seb here. He's still the record holder for the youngest world champion. I think BT Lewis's record by a couple of 100 days. You know, he won his championships back to back, so 4 in a row. The only guy that's ever done better than that is Michael Schumacher. Did Vettel announce he was leaving? Was it the race weekend, something like that? And then 9 o'clock Monday morning UK time, I see on my phone a notification suggesting that Alonso signed a multi-year deal with to join Aston Martin. I thought, that can't be right. That's got to be Andrew Benson retweeting another sort of fake account. But no, it turned out that it was all choreographed and already.
The funny thing with Alonso is that he was renowned in his younger days for being quite impatient, you know, not really trusting in a process. But, you know, taking time out of the sport, doing the Indy 500 a couple of times and failing, you know, having to take part in Dakar racing and failing, it's humbled him, you know. And I think when you're a person with such a big ego and then you get brought to your knees, it does humble you, you know. So I think maybe he's looking to buy into a long-term project there. And perhaps, you know, with the amount of money being generated into it, it might be something that could pay off.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I saw a quote from Alonso saying Aston Martin is clearly applying the energy and commitment to win. That means they're putting a lot of money in. I think that's code. So I think there's something about him wanting a competitive car. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said ego. I think Alonso still believes he's the best driver, most complete driver on the grid. I'm sure that there'll be some people online on Twitter that agree with that. I'm not one of them. I do think he's still, you know, a force. And if he were in maybe one of those front teams, he would still be competitive for sure.
Well, you could never say never there, Black, can you? And then, you know, there's a good old saying, a clock always strikes correct twice a day. So I would never ever completely rule it out. But yeah, unless, you know, Aston Martin do an absolute madness with the regulations in the upcoming years, you know, when they basically recreate the third wheel, you know, in the time continuum. Yeah, it seems unlikely. And actually, the more likely faith I think Alonso will follow is one depicted by a very funny meme, because there was a meme out there. I dare go on it with my phone because I fear for the 6th time I'll get kicked out of this recording because of technical issues. But essentially, you're saying, what do Felipe Massa, Vettel, and Alonso have in common? And I think it was like basically failed by Ferrari, and then essentially gonna basically get absolutely out succeeded by Lance Stroll at Aston Martin / you know, Williams.
I want to cook the people that try to rationalize it, because I cannot stand what I've seen. People saying, "Oh, well, you know, it's not racism. It's because of rivalries." What, you mean like the time Prost supporters were burning Senna merch, or, you know, Alonso supporters were burning Schumacher merch? No, this doesn't happen. It's literally never happened before in F1. You know, so don't come up with that. Or oh, well, you know, they bought the merch, so they have a right to do whatever they want. Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, if you want people to buy wood and turn it into a cross and they own it, then they buy some gasoline in a match and they burn that cross wearing a white hood Are you saying that, well, they bought all that stuff, so that's fine? Like, absolutely not.
I think we should refer to them as the orange rats. And Max Verstappen is clearly the Pied Piper of those rats. So that's the first thing I want to get in there. And secondly of all as well, yeah, I mean, we have to actually strip it back a page here, like, because you see, just to give it context, Max has come out and condemned the fans publicly for their behavior, but that's not good enough. And then even on Martin Brundle's grid walk, they asked Stefano Domenicali, big, head of Formula One management right now, about what's going on. And he basically pointed the finger to social media, which then I'll go into a rabbit hole on that, because some very distressing scenes were seen at the weekend where somebody, and I'm not going to even mention their account name because they don't deserve no clout on this channel, they superimposed a picture of Lewis Hamilton's head on George Floyd's head in that sickening, very distressful picture of a police officer kneeling down on George Floyd, and then put George Russell as the police officer as some sort of sick joke, to which many people reported the abuse online on Twitter, including myself. And all I got from Twitter was, yes, this behavior fits into a category of abuse and discrimination. And the tweet was deleted, but not the guy who made the tweet. Christian Horner's distasteful comments in Silverstone, or Josh Verstappen accusing Lewis of taking performance-enhancing drugs from Angelo on the grid, or even recently, if people really suffer from amnesia, the Nelson Piquet comments as well, which were very, very distasteful and concerning coming from a fellow world champion as well. But clearly he's not a world champion and not a champ of the people. So, it brings us back to this first thing we mentioned of, whether or not this is going to be a persisting issue. And I believe it will, because until, the FIA, until the media take more accountability for this and actually take a zero tolerance approach to this unacceptable behavior, then it's just going to continue and people will think that they can get away with this. And if you don't make people an example, if you don't show people that, that this is not good enough, then they'll just continue to persist to do it. And you see it with children and parents all the time. If you let them get away with a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit of banter here, then they don't establish a level of respect.
If you want to find, if you're studying PR or media relations or anything like that, and you want to see like tone deaf, lack of understanding, then look out of this driver out campaign. So the backstory is earlier in the season, I think it was, or maybe even in the off season, sort of inexplicably, Formula One sort of ended its "We Race as One" campaign. Okay, so they got rid of that slogan. I'm not really sure what else it did, but clearly they did have at each race a message of solidarity from the drivers and what they called a gesture. Some drivers taking the knee, others, for their apparent reasons, deciding not to. Anyway, they got rid of that campaign. And then I remember it must have been the Saturday night, maybe it's a Friday night, whenever this burning happened. The following morning, there was a comment by an F1 media member who I won't mention on here, who said, "Oh, well, you just wait 1 hour. You're serious. You just see how serious F1 takes, this sort of behavior and this sort of abuse." And I thought it's going to be a joke. It's going to be terrible. But do you know what? I'll give it a chance. And then do you know what? It turned out it was a hashtag. So they've gone from "We Race as One" to drive it out. I'm not a big fan of that. The second thing is, listen, this is a phrase that doesn't fill me with confidence, right? So it says, "Those who hide behind social media with abusive and disrespectful views are not our fans," right? So absolutely, we don't want people hiding behind social media and being abusive. And maybe disrespectful views does mean, being intolerant and being completely nasty to other people. But part of me, I have a nagging feeling that since Abu Dhabi, Formula One, the powers that be, they've not enjoyed the ride that they've had on Twitter and on other platforms, because quite frankly, They've made huge mistakes in administering their sport. They've then attempted to gloss it over, to brush it under the carpet. And people online have quite rightly said, well, hang on a minute. No, this is not acceptable. And I just worry that quote unquote disrespectful views, I wouldn't be surprised if people in F1 HQ and the FAA would include those of us who stood up against the calamity that was, or the conspiracy that was Abu Dhabi, that they wouldn't lump us in with that. What was your first impression, Dens, of the Drive It Out campaign when you saw it going live that morning?
Black, they can drive my back foot, because that to me means nothing. It means nothing at all. That is just another blanket statement to paper over the cracks, man. Like, the people think that we're really stupid, or they must have thought that we were born at breakfast or something, because, clearly they haven't lived a day in the shoes of people like you or I, man. And this is, like I said, there was that whole bust up. I don't know if you saw, like, this photographer had a bit of a misdemeanor with a security guard, and he got his lip absolutely bump up. So why, I can't understand if a guy is there like being racist, if a guy is there being homophobic, if a guy there is being like narcissistic, if a guy's being disruptive, why it's not the same energy that it gets met up with, because ultimately it should be the same. And I think there's an educational part of it. I think that there's a lot of things that people need to learn still. But then again, you can't force a horse to drink water. There's certain people that they're not interested in learning, and they're more than content and happy holding these stupid views. So we need to take away the power from them and not engage with them, firstly of all. But secondly of all, like I said, it goes back to the original thing. Zero tolerance is what I'm on now. Black, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Like, when Lewis Hamilton was lying down on the ground in Paul Ricard, like, I'm tired. Like it's because it's week in, it's week out, and it's not getting better really. It's getting worse, and it's for the reasons I mentioned earlier too.
But this guy single-handedly cheated Lewis Hamilton and fans and his mechanics and the entire team out of the rightful 8th World Championship that he was 1 lap or 2 laps away from getting, by applying, quote unquote, applying rules, aka making up rules as they went along, in a way that meant that Max Verstappen basically was gifted the victory and therefore gifted the championship. And before I come to you, Dens, the funny thing a few people have pointed out to me is, if you didn't have Abu Dhabi, we'd have a lot more focused on what happened in Jeddah last season, because that was a calamity. The number of times that Verstappen came back on track and ran Hamilton into a wall, or Hamilton had to back out, or he didn't break into turn 1 and basically caused contact. And then Massey negotiating with Red Bull about what the penalty was going to be, the brake check, then giving Lewis Hamilton a black and white flag. It was a complete, show. Keeping it PG for our youthful audience. but this guy was out of his depth. He was completely rude in front of hundreds of millions of people and disrespectful in the way he conducted his work. And this is the thing. He's not apologized one bit. But there might be a reason for that. So what we discovered in the same interview is it's come to light that Michael Massey has signed a non-disclosure agreement with the FIA, which means that it's probably unlikely that we'll ever hear his side of the story, his version of events.
I say, man, they got Michael Massey and FIA witness protection and that. It's long. But, it's, man, in the short version of what I'm just about to say, we'll never know. Something smells funny and something doesn't look right in the light. That rhymes. But clearly there's something that they don't want it to become public knowledge, because of course then why is the NDA there? And we have to think about it too. Michael Massey is one person, and the guy that gets the corn, should I say, because he is the one that was the voice. He's the one that was actually the one that inherited the position from the great Charlie Whiting. So yes, he gets a lot of stick, but there's part of me that believes that it's not just one man that was able to create so much, disaster. And you mentioned, if it hadn't been for Abu Dhabi, it would have been Jeddah. I could one up you on that one, Black. If it wasn't for Jeddah, it'd be Brazil. Because I don't know if you remember in Brazil where Max completely forgot to turn a corner, completely ran loose off the road, and then the incident was noted, and then it's like the whole FIA monitoring system got frozen, like Elsa, because it just continued to be noted and no action was taken afterwards. And then obviously there was the onboard footage that should have been on Max Verstappen's car, and again we didn't see that footage for about maybe 9-10 days. The FAA were trying to basically let the footage marinate and that in the sauce. So yeah, I mean, obviously Michael Massey will take the brunt for it. It's been 7 months and you still haven't got over it. You're salty, but I want them to know they're saltier than saltfish patties. Let's just get that in there too. But yeah, it's not tracking for me, Black. It's a bit of like, what's the name of that really eerily creepy series called Unsolved? Oh, gonna give it away straight away. Unsolved Mysteries. I think one day in the future, when me and you are, hopefully retired in, a nice island somewhere in Barbados, and Georgina's helping us live off the fat of the land, there might be a wild episode on Unsolved Mysteries with Michael Massey being the star of that show, because we'll never know, and I think that there's a lot of things which happen that we're not privy to. I think that, when you've got this like $1 billion boys club and they're so infatuated with basically, upholding a record that was like, made by Michael Schumacher, and then Lewis Hamilton was gonna easily, he's only 3 or 4 laps. You know how bad it is when even Christian Horner comes onto the radio and says, Michael, you only need 1 lap, Michael. Like, people get on to Toto for saying, no, Mikey, this is so not right. But people don't remember that Christian Horner was the one begging on the radio, Mikey, you only need 1 lap, Mikey. 1 lap, Mikey, and that. That's what I have to call him as well now. 1 lap, Mikey.
A few weeks ago, Alex Palou, who's the reigning IndyCar champion, he appeared to announce that he'd be staying with his current team, Chip Ganassi Racing. There was a quote from him in a press release given by the team, except the following day, Alex Palou completely denied ever having given those quotes and said, actually, no, I'm not staying at Chip Ganassi Racing. I'm going to McLaren. And it's very interesting because I say the word McLaren loosely. We know that McLaren has teams in Formula E, Formula One, for which it's most famous, and IndyCar. So we thought it was over. Okay, there's a little bit of some shenanigans, but actually Alex Palou will be going to Mercedes, or so we thought, because Chip Ganassi fired back and said, no, I've got a contract with you, so I've got an option for you to be in the Chip Ganassi car, and you'll be in it in 2023, and that's just how it is. So completely sort of surprising, I think, to the IndyCar paddock. This whole saga has moved from just being a bit of gossip, a bit of private wrangling, to a court case. And it's that Alex Palou has a contract that says he's not allowed to engage with other IndyCar teams, to consider future drives, contracts, etc., while he's under contract with Chip Ganassi. So when you saw Alex Palou's statements and actually the motion he's filed, etc., he talks a lot about, this is Chip Ganassi preventing me from realizing my dream of driving in Formula One. How many of our listeners think that Alex Palou will be in that McLaren seat next year instead of Ricciardo? I certainly don't. But he's clearly treading on some very, very shaky ground. And in fact, his filing, when he asked to move the case to the federal court, this is legalese, and where's Malik when you need him? It says defendants currently, so that he's basically, it says he's anticipating asserting non-contractual counterclaims, including at least for defamation. So what does that mean? That means he's not, as far as I understand, it means he's not arguing about the contract, but instead his claim against Chip Ganassi is that he's been defamed.
which he's come out to kind of defend himself, probably because he's seen a couple of us grilling him. And he was basically explaining that he had no idea that Alex Palou was still contracted to Chip Ganassi. And the way that Alex Palou's people had presented him was that he was free to speak to. So essentially, that's why they've come out and basically said, you do what you have to do. We're basically not going to get involved and we're not going to buy you out of your contract. Which is why now we've got this situation, a civil situation between Alex and Chip Ganassi Racing as to what's going to happen with the contract. Because, of course, they need him to race for them next season. He probably wants to get himself, more acclimatized with the McLaren program. And should Ricardo not, go on with McLaren post 2023, he probably wants to line himself up to be first in line on the throne. So it's an interesting one, and as to who will win out, it's going to be really tough to say there, Black, because at the end of the day, Chip Ganassi do have a contract. It does seem quite evident that is the case. Can give him a bit of kick up the rear. Man, they even got Jimmy Johnson. The man, the myth, the legend, Jimmy J. So I don't understand why Chip being so kind of like tough about it, and those are just the current IndyCar drivers. They've got Tony Kanaan, another amazing driver on the sideline. They've got Alex Lynn, a very declarated F2 driver that also does World Endurance Championship racing, and legendary Sebastian Bourdais. I know that you and the legendary F1 fans know about Sebastian Bourdais, like in relation to his Toro Rosso days back in the day. But yeah, long story short, I think that something has to give. I could understand Chip kind of playing like hardball and saying, well, listen, you're going to drive for us. And if you don't want to drive for us, pay up, So I think the mistake that Palou and his people probably learn from this, is, don't, what's the good old saying? Don't celebrate too early until you cross the line, because it's clear to see that business wasn't completely finished or conducted. And